My name is Sergei Sergeev. I'm from Belarus, Minsk. I'm SharePoint and Office 365 developer and consultant, Microsoft MVP under Office development category. Most of the time I work as independent contractor. And in this demo, we're going to take a look at real-time PnP provisioning with SignalR and SharePoint application customizer. And we're going to start with a bit of theory. Yeah, so sorry guys, no demo at the beginning. And we are starting with the problem statement. In other words, what issue we're going to solve in this demo. Let's say that you've just created a brand new SharePoint website, and you also have a custom background process connected to this website. For example, PnP provisioning process, or PnP provisioning and some custom code which somehow configures or updates the website. The main idea is that this process is still constantly updating your website and the website isn't fully ready for use, right? And this background task usually takes significant amount of time, let's say half an hour, maybe an hour. And this is the issue because your users see the website, but the site is still under construction. New lists are being added. Probably look and feel is changing, etc. And the site is not fully ready yet. And that might be confusing for the users. And there is a solution. The solution is to, for example, to simply show a kind of indication to a user that the process is on its own way. For example, using this progress bar, like on the image. But don't limit yourself. You can use any other things, like, for example, you can use right side pane to show all the applied steps, etc. Maybe some other user interface, but I selected a progress bar. And this bar updates itself as we finish single operation on a server. For example, we provisioned lists and fields, we added client-side pages, navigation, etc. But the question is how to update this progress without requiring a user to constantly refresh the page, to constantly hit this F5 button, right? So one option would be using server polling on a timer basis. For example, you can send an async HTTP request to the server asking for an update every 1 second or every 10 seconds. And this might work. However, it's not efficient, and additionally, it adds some unnecessary load on the server. And moreover, web technology and ASP.NET in particular provides a better answer on this question. And we are going to use SignalR, which is part of ASP.NET, a SignalR service, in order to push real-time notification updates from the server to the client. The updates about the current operation on the server. So in that case, our user is aware that something is still happening on the website is not fully ready, and that's a good chance for a user to have a cup of tea or a coffee. But probably you know what is SharePoint framework and application customizer, etc. But what is SignalR exactly? SignalR, that's a technology which makes it possible to create a two-way interactive communication channel between the user's browser and the server. Under the hood, by default, SignalR uses technology called WebSockets as transport layer between a server and the client. And WebSockets today, they are broadly supported. You see that it is Internet Explorer 10+. And what else? SignalR is capable of sending push notifications from a server side to all connected clients. So a client, in our case, that's a user's browser. And it looks like this is exactly what we need for our problem, to solve our problem. we will use SignalR to push notifications about the current PNP provision operation to the users. Because in this situation, our server, our background process is the source of events. Okay. So now I think we understand the problem, the solution, and we understand what is SignalR. Let's finally go ahead and see the demo. First of all, I'm going to create a new communication website, and I'm going to use a custom site design called PNP Drone. Let me show you what is, how did I make this custom site design. First of all, I have a site script. Site script contains two site script actions. The first one triggers a flow, and this flow simply adds a new message into the Azure queue. I'm going to demonstrate you this Azure. That's an Azure Logic App. That's not it's not Power Automate, aka MS Flow, because in Power Automate HTTP connector is premium. So if you don't have premium subscription, then you can use Azure Logic Apps for the same purpose. So that's something I did here. I use Azure Logic App, and I use HTTP when HTTP request is received trigger. And what I do, I simply put a new message on a PNP provisioning queue, and I put a web URL as parameter. And the next action in my site script is associate extension. I have an extension called PNP Notifier, which later we will see that it will show this progress bar to the end users. And finally, site design. The site design, it is called PNP Drone, and this site design has this site script associated. So let's go ahead and create a new website. I'm going to, let's say, PNP Drone demo, and the owner, and click finish. And creating. Okay, let's open. And by the way, right now you see that how Microsoft solved this issue with progress notifications. And we see this right side pane, which shows all the steps applied from my site design. So we see that MS Flow was triggered and the extension was associated with this website. Let's see the updated site. And right now we know that under the hood, we have a PNP provisioning web job, which is right now it is running, or maybe it is preparing. That is why our website is not fully ready yet. That is why we see this message saying that preparing the engine, and this message comes from our custom extension application customizer called PNP Notifier. So basically, yeah, right now you see that it is starting, and now we are provisioning list instances. So what just happened? Our web job started its work, and web job sent a few notifications to the browser, and the browser updated the user experience. So this top line goes forward. Let's see how it looks like from a very high-level perspective. So I've created a new communication website based on custom site design here at step number 1. We have our website, and we have an Azure Logic App, which added a new queue to Azure queue. And we have a PNP provision web job, which listens to our Azure queue. So in some words, our Azure Queue executes PnP provisioning web job. And finally, Azure Web Job adds new SharePoint artifacts like lists, fields, etc. And at the same time, PnP provisioning job pushes notifications to our SignalR server. And SignalR server, in turn, notifies our UI or client browser about current progress. For example, we see that currently we are adding client-side pages. Okay, so right now let's leave it and let's go and see some coding. Let's start with I think with SignalR Hub. Basically, we have three components here. That's SignalR Hub, that's Azure Web Job, provisioning web job, and finally a SharePoint application customizer. We're going to start with SignalR Hub, and this is the hub itself, the code. The code itself is not complicated, I would say. A few important moments here is this authorize attribute, because we shouldn't expose any enterprise API to outside world without authentication. And this hub uses Azure ID GWT authentication. That is why authorize attribute is required here. And we have three methods in order to handle different requests to clients. The first one is notify. This method simply sends notify event to all connected clients. So these are all SignalR related things. So this code sends notify to our browser, and additionally it sends some data which contains, for example, current progress and let's say current operation name. Next, we have completed event. This event notifies our browsers, our clients, that we are fully completed the provisioning process. And finally, we have initial state. Initial state, it is called callable method, because you can call this method from client, because if you remember, SignalR is a way to establish two-way communication channel. So I can send requests from server, like using notify and completed events. So I notify clients, and I can also execute a method from client side on a server. So I use initial state in order to immediately update my user interface with current status. For example, in case if a user opens a page for the first time, or if a user simply refreshes the current page. That is why I use this method. I call this method from client in order to get current status. And then notify method automatically updates the progress. And if you go to startup class, that's by the way, that's ASP.NET Core solution. And there are some important things to establish the authentication, GWT authentication with Azure AD. Basically, you should just call a few methods and configure authentication with some important methods like validate audience, issue validator, and some other things. Okay, let's go and see our provisioning job. So here we have the job. The job has two main functions. The first function is to provision objects using PnP. And the second part is to delete our custom top component here, this one component, because we need this component only while we are provisioning the website. But at the very end, we should delete this. And we have a method which deletes the application customizer, because under the hood it uses custom actions. That is why we simply need to find a custom action by its name and finally to delete it. And the provisioning process is here. First of all, I store all the data and the template on Azure Blob. So if we go to to Storage Explorer, we can see that I have a blob container called pimpdron, and I have all the files, and I have the template available here. That is why in the code I use XML storage template provider and Azure Storage Connector for files. And finally, apply provision template method executes the process. And this apply information, that's the delegate which notifies the clients, the browsers, about the progress. It is possible via this notify progress method. If we go and see how it looks like, that's just I would say two-liner. The first line is to create and establish connection to our SignalR hub. So I use just built-in ASP.NET classes like hub connection builder. And what is very important here is this generate access token method, because as we saw, our hub has authorized attribute, and we set up GWT authentication in our configure services. That is why it is very important to provide valid authentication. So here for authentication, I use Azure ID app registration. Again, if you go and see the the Azure ID, I've added the app registration here, and I use client ID and client secret in order to generate an GWT access token using MSAL.NET library using version 2 endpoints. And I generate the token for my client itself. That is why I use this scope. And finally, the second line is to hub connection send async. For example, here I specified notify method. So how it works, it sends this state, this provisioning state. Basically, that's a message, the progress, and the total steps. And at the very end, it will hit here. And finally, all our clients, the browser, will receive this new message about new progress and new state. Okay, and so this is the job itself. Again, for authentication against SharePoint, I use certificate-based approach. You can use any other option. For example, you can use SharePoint app registration for authentication. But as I have the Azure ID registration here, then I decided to use the same Azure ID registration. That is why if you go to API permissions, then you see that I have added full control scope for SharePoint. Okay, and finally, let's go and see our client-side part, the SharePoint Framework Application Customizer. This is the React component I use to display this progress. There's just a few elements. And the key thing here is, again, this SignalR Hub Connection Builder and Hub Connection. These are classes from ASP.NET SignalR Node.js module. And here again, you see I use access token factor in order to generate the valid GWT token. So if you go and see how it works, I use built-in SPFX AD token provider in order to generate the access token. And the client ID, it comes from constants here. That's the same client ID I use for my SignalR Hub application registration. So it's from here. And finally, under this connection, I have exactly 3 methods, the same way as for SignalR Hub. Here I have connection on notify, on completed, and on initial state. So these callbacks, they handle different events coming from the server from SignalR Hub. Okay. And finally, if you go and see the user interface, it says that the site is fully provisioned. Now we can refresh it, and finally we will see the updated website based on the drone template. The template I use, it is under GitHub repository SPDev provisioning templates. I use Contoso drone landing website as a base for this demo. Okay, so yeah, I think this is it from my side.
Good. Thank you, Sergei. Don't disconnect,
okay?
Because I want to ask a few questions, and let's talk about some of the things. Really cool solution, and thanks for clarifying the bits and pieces, because I think that's highly helpful for people to understand how would I adapt these things as well. Okay. Now, a flow versus logic app was a good point which you did, and this is obviously super clear for you because you thought about that one as well. But in the site designs, you can activate either a Microsoft Power Automate and a flow inside of Power Automate, which used to be a Microsoft Flow, or you can activate a logic app, and logic app is basically behind of the Microsoft Flow as well, or Power Automate, whatever we call these things nowadays. So, but and the difference, like you said, is really about the licensing. The HTTP request licensing in the Microsoft Power Automate is a premium license, and that means that there's a licensing impact on it. And did we lose Sergei completely?
Nope.
Okay, you just stop sharing.
Yeah,
okay,
I stopped sharing.
Got it. Because I would have asked you to pinpoint something, but that's fine. That's fine. Now. But a key point there to understand is obviously if you use a logic app, then the logic app has a cost impact as well, but it's not necessarily similar cost impact as using the Power Automate. So it's one of those things where when you make the design decision, you need to understand, has the customer already have a license on the Power Automate, and if they need to have a license, how much is the cost impact versus what will be the cost impact of logic app? Have you, just out of curiosity, on your case, Sergei, have you done any a cost estimate on how much the logic app would cost in a normal scenario, or has anybody in the call made any estimates on that?
No, actually I haven't compared.
Because obviously that's a really interesting discussion point, and I'm curious if somebody actually has any experiences on that, but no immediate actions, at least on the chat. Now the second thing. So the second thing, what I wanted to actually kind of mention, in your case, the toolbar was super settled. But to be fair, like you pointed out as well, Sergei, you could actually almost do a full screen overlay, which is saying, hey, the site is not ready. We are still progressing and doing stuff. So you don't actually need to be super small and settle on the messaging. It is a design decision, absolutely. Inside of Microsoft, initially, we didn't actually tell the end user when a site design was still applying. We didn't actually tell that it's still applying, and then that freaked out people. So that's why the panel model came to be as a new version in the site designs, and we implemented that there. You could implement your custom panel as well. So in this case, it was a small header, but again, it could be much more visible indication as well. And then there was the one thing which I wanted to just pinpoint. The site design added the application customizer. On the site level, the application customizer was deployed using a tenant scope deployment option. So, and that was then available for all of the sites, but basically in the site designs, we just added the application customizer as a user custom action entry. That's what it basically meant on the JSON definition. And then in the code, we removed that. So that way, that indication was no longer relevant. Quite nice pattern actually of making things happen. So super nice implementation. And then a final piece, maybe just to talk about this one as well. In Ignite and past Ignite in the conferences, we demoed the Fluid framework, which actually does provide similar kind of capabilities whenever we'll ship it as the SignalR. It is designed for other things as well. So Fluid framework will be used in the future for document collaboration, co-authoring scenarios and all of that. And you could actually use the Fluid framework way of communicating between things. But again, SignalR is one of the, how would I put it, industry standards and ways of doing these kind of things as well. So it's a pretty nice implementation. Any other learnings from your side, Sergei, related on the design? Was this just a experiment which you wanted to do, or was this a customer engagement?
I used SignalR in my previous projects, but they were for just regular ASP.NET with SharePoint. ASP.NET separate web app, not integrated to SharePoint. And this demo is more like experiment on how you can implement all the things, including valid authentication, Azure ID authentication from both sides, from SPFX, from Azure Web Job, etc. So yeah,
makes perfect sense. But really, it is pretty clean. It's also open source. It is available in GitHub. So it's a quite nice setup on showing the pattern, and that's what we always want to do within the community call. So explaining how to achieve certain things using the demos. So really cool setup. Now. There was a message. One thing interesting: to call a manual flow from the site design as HTTP web request, no premium connected there. Is to call a manual flow for site design. Now I'm not following. Rodrigo, you need to explain. Can you go unmuted and related on that one? That is an interesting discussion point because we still have a few minutes to talk about.
Yes. So, hello everybody. So basically, you can call a manual flow. You can put the URL of the manual flow on the web design call for the flow itself. So it's you cannot put it's not the premium connector, so you can use it instead of the HTTP request.
Ah, that's clever. That's a really good point as well. And then it really depends again, but to be fair, it depends on what your manual flow is doing, because I think adding a message to the storage queue is a premium connector, unless I'm completely mistaken. I don't know. I'm not a flow guy.
It is, yeah.
So yeah, exactly. So you would get your execution to the flow, but then how do you get that to the Azure function? That's always the question. So using the Logic app is definitely an option there as well. But again, cost structure is different. It's not based on the end user license. It's based on the consumption of the Logic app. So, and haven't done any actual investigations on the cost structures there.